Good morning, everyone. This is the May 6th, 2021 meeting of the Lower Downtown Design Review Commission, and we'll officially call the meeting to order. And as usual, before we begin our discussion, let's quickly review the options for public comment. If you're joining by a computer, tablet, or smartphone, you should select the hand raise option. If you're calling in by phone, you need to email landmark@denvergov.org with your name, phone number, and the project that you'd like to discuss. Sorry. And, you can also visit, is it still room 4I5 at the web building?
Yes, that's correct.
Awesome. If you'd like to participate in person. So, and we'll also start by asking each commissioner to provide their name and the position that they serve on the commission. I will begin. I'm Jane Chrysler, the chair and preservation architect. And then Mike.
I am Mike Coughlin, and I am in the developer role on the commission.
Andy.
Andy Duck-Nimke, preservation architect.
Fred.
Fred Glick, property owner now. Correct? Yes. Thank you.
And Heather.
Heather Vasquez Johnson, practicing architect.
And Steve.
File business representative.
Great. Okay, so first on our agenda, we need to approve some meeting records or discuss meeting records. Do any of the commissioners have comments or clarifications on both the March 4th and the April 1st, 2021 meeting records? Okay, would someone like to make a motion to approve? Oops, I think
Steve,
Steve.
I make the motion that we approve the meeting notes for both dates.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Heather, for the second. And we'll do a roll call vote and start with Mike.
I will abstain because I had to recuse myself from the March meeting.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Andy?
Likewise, I'll have to recuse since I wasn't at the March meeting.
So Jen, does that mean that we need to table these till next time?
Yeah, I don't think that you can finish. I think you have to finish the vote and then.
Okay. Okay, great.
Can I ask a question? Did you have to be there to vote on accepting the minutes?
No, I don't think that's a requirement. Adam, I'm looking towards you to see if you have any advice there.
Not a requirement, but may want to consider whether you want to vote on something you were not present for.
Can I just throw out a question? Should we perhaps separate these into two separate motions so that we can at least get the April ones approved?
Yeah, I think you're in the middle of voting, so you have to finish the vote and then you can split it.
How about a friendly amendment?
You have to finish voting. And then you can. Sorry, Steve.
Okay, so we left off with Fred.
Aye.
And Heather.
Aye.
And Steve.
Aye.
And Jane Chrysler, also an aye. So the motion does not pass for lack of a quorum. So would anyone like to make a new motion?
Well, actually, how many yes votes did you have?
4,
And how many people are present?
6.
That's enough. You only
Oh.
need 5 votes to pass a design review. It's just a majority of who's present to pass general business.
Oh, okay.
Perfect. Then the motion does pass. Yay, we did it. Okay, thank you all. So we do not have any consent agenda items today. So that brings us to our design review agenda. And just as a reminder, staff will make a presentation followed by questions by the commissioners. The applicant, if present, will have up to 10 minutes to make a presentation to the commissioners, followed by questions by the commissioners. Members of the public are welcome to comment for up to 2 minutes each. And again, we reviewed that can be whether you're joining by computer or tablet, whether you're calling in or if you're attending in person. Staff can offer clarifications, and then following that testimony, the commission will go into deliberation and will vote. So the one and only item we have on our design agenda is 2021 COA 184 1942 through 46 Market Street. And I can't hear you, Brittany. Can others hear her? And it doesn't say that you're muted.
Yeah, and we could hear her earlier.
All right, I'm gonna mute you and then see if that works as the, okay, now I'm gonna ask you to unmute, see if that works. Nope. Grr. Do you want to leave the meeting and join in? Yeah, sorry, Brittany. She's been having trouble. This happened the last LPC meeting. She her laptop like was fine, and then all of a sudden decided not to allow her to talk. So super
Probably
strange.
all very tired after the last year.
All right, let me. Come on. All right, stop remote control. Brittany, does that help? No? All right. She said that when I allowed her to remote control, and that disabled all of her controls on her side. She could only control my screen, but not hers. So, so I had to unremote control. She could leave. Now she's joining back in. So fingers crossed this time. Any better? No, we can't hear you. Oh my gosh.
How about now?
Yes.
Whew, journeys.
All right, you ready
can
for
you
me to
just-
remote control?
Yeah.
Cool. I'm sorry, Mike, I accidentally clicked the wrong person. So you are not remote controlling, Brittany is.
Okay. Can you hear me still? All right, great. So our first proposal is for signage for the new tenants that will be moving into the House of Mirrors building and the former Lodo's Bar and Grill. The applicant and the applicant's representative are requesting 2 new signs, a wall sign and a projecting sign. The projecting sign will be installed on 1942 Market Street, which is the House of Mirrors building, and the wall sign will be installed on 1946 Market Street, which was historically a Keystone Milling company. This whole building will be readdressed as 1946 Market Street, and it is one tenant that will occupy both buildings and the new addition that is being constructed where that vacant lot is shown in this photograph. These buildings are all connected internally and by zoning are considered one use. So in 2019, the Lower Downtown Design Review Commission reviewed alterations to this building and site that includes a new 2-story addition at that vacant lot, a new rooftop deck on the Lodos building to replace the current rooftop deck, and a small rooftop addition to the House of Mirrors building, as well as rebuilding much of the non-historic walls at the rear and alley of the property. So that work has begun if anyone has been out to the site recently. So here is the proposal for the wall sign. This sign is 27 inches by 438 inches. It is an aluminum pan channel letter sign with an open face that will have neon illumination in it. The sign is placed on the sign band for the Lodos building. However, the top and bottom of the channel letter does have overlap with the sign band detail, as you can see in this enlargement detail call out here. So generally speaking, the sign does meet our planning guidelines in terms of pedestrian placement above a primary entrance. But Landmark staff does have some concerns with the sign band being overlapped with the channel letter at the top and bottom. As the applicant is proposing individual channel letters, the entirety of the sign band will not be covered, but our guidelines do talk about not covering architectural details. It's not covering a highly decorative architectural detail, but our guidelines also do recommend some relief for the between the sign band and the sign when installing a wall sign in a historic sign band. So next we have the projecting sign. This will be installed above the primary entrance to the House of Mirrors. The projecting sign will be installed above or at the limestone header above the entrance. It will have 3 6-inch penetrations into the limestone, and there will actually be a mounting plate located on the exterior and interior of the building. The applicant has indicated to staff that these penetrations would be easy to patch and that this mounting style was recommended by their structural engineer. We actually did suggest that maybe the projecting sign be placed on the Lodo mirror and mounted into the mortar of the Lodos building. However, the applicant has indicated that there would be some issues with that mounting style. So they thought that this was the best method to use a mounting plate on the interior and exterior of the building. So it will have a 3/8-inch steel mounting plate on the exterior, and it will be 1/4 of an inch thick on the interior. Our guidelines do talk about not damaging the building when installing new signs. So we did have some concerns over this mounting style, but again, the applicant has indicated that if the sign were to be removed, it could be easily patched and replaced. So the proposed projecting sign is going to be 12 inches in depth that you can see here. And then you can see the mounting plate detail in this drawing here, but I have other drawings that show the projecting sign a little bit better. So the proposed projecting sign is a circular shaped sign. The Denver zoning code allows for signs to be either 2 or 3 dimensional shapes. Our design guidelines have taken that a bit farther in which they encourage signs to be three-dimensional iconographic objects. Staff feel that the applicant has applied neon to the sign face and sides of the sign to create a more dimensional effect. And the use of neon illumination on the sign is representative of exceptional lighting design, which is in our guidelines and the Denver zoning code for projecting signs. Similar shaped signs with iconographic neon use have been approved by the commission, such as the 7 Grand sign, which is on the Dairy Block building, and the Huckleberry Coffee Roaster sign, which is also on the Dairy Block building. And I do have examples of those signs at the end of this presentation, but I want to stay on this page for a moment. So the sign will have a simple bracket that projects 25 inches from the building facade. And the reason for the bracket projection is the House of Mirrors building is actually recessed a bit from the Lodos building, which you can see in Plan View V here on the B on the screen here. So they actually have designed the bracket to push the sign forward of that recess, so the sign will be visible from the pedestrian right away when you're on the other side of the Lodos building. Both the projecting sign and the wall sign align with each other horizontally across the facade. So that is another reason for the projecting signs placement on the House of Mirrors, as our guidelines encourage signs to be above primary entrances and then also coordinated across building facades. So here you can see that neon will be used around all the lettering on each sign face, and then neon strips will be used around the edges of the sign. Staff do have one minor concern about this proposed projecting sign. The lettering is proposed to be a vinyl graphic, and we don't allow the use of vinyl within the lower downtown historic district. So we would recommend that instead of a vinyl graphic, that it either be a painted or some other digital print to apply the Dierks Bentley Whiskey Row graphics to the sign face. So that is our one concern in regards to the projecting sign. So here is the visualization of the wall sign during the day and night. Our guidelines do encourage signs to be readable at daytime and nighttime. Again, this sign will have white neon illumination within the open pan channel letter. And you can kind of see the projecting sign, but I have a better image of that. So here is the proposed projecting sign. Again, that simple bracket that is a little bit big, and that's due to the recess of the House of Mirrors facade and wanting to push the sign out so that it is visible on the north side of the building sites on Market Street. And then iconographic neon use. So here is the projecting sign inspiration. I don't know the dimensions of this sign, but I do not believe the projecting sign that we are looking at today is as large as this one, and will be more in scale with projecting signs that have been approved by the Lower Downtown Design Review Commission. So that is the 7 Grand sign, the Poca-Lola sign, and the Huckleberry Coffee Roasters. All of these signs are on the Dairy Block building, just for reference, that you can see kind of a similar shape, size, depth of that sign. And then the applicant is using iconographic neon similar to the 7 Grand and the Huckleberry Coffee Roasters to provide that, that stylistic design to the sign. So we're recommending conditional approval of the application for the wall sign with the following conditions: that the height of the wall sign pan channel letter not overlap with the sign border. Revise the vinyl graphic proposed for the projecting sign face to be either a digital print or painted, and ensure the penetrations into the limestone header can be patched and repaired.
Thank you, Brittany. Are there any questions from commissioners for Brittany?
I have a couple.
I'm sorry, I don't want to step on
Yeah.
anyone.
Oh, go ahead, Mike,
Brittany,
and then
you
we'll just.
About this sign border that's being partially overlapped by the pan channel letters. That's a brick set on the opposite direction, correct? It's kind of the short side of the brick. I can't really see
is.
what the existing condition is, I guess. Could you
Yeah.
describe what that looks like right now?
So I'm going to actually go back to the photograph. It's a little difficult to see, but the building does have some, it's a red brick building, and then it has some beige brick detailing. The sign band is a beige sign band. It's about, I think, 3.5 inches in height. So it is, it's not a very tall sign, and you can see that the Lodo sign currently sits on top of that sign band, and then the bar and grill is within the sign band. You can see that in this image somewhat that it is long across the facade, so the sign will fit totally within the width of the sign, but the pan channel letters will have overlap at the top and bottom of the sign, the beige brick sign band. But you can kind of tell in this enlargement detail what that overlap is. The red is indicating the sign band detail there, and then the overlap that is proposed there. Our guidelines do talk about design signs to be in scale and proportion with the building facade and the historic context. Do not remove, alter, or cover visually obstruct historic architectural features such as windows, columns, and decorative horizontal banding. So that's a standard. And then a guideline is design signs to reinforce the building's articulation, rhythm, and architectural features. So again, this isn't a highly decorative feature, but it is a feature of the building. And then the guidelines and standards for wall signs specifically state that, sorry, I lost my place, that when using an existing sign band, provide space between the sign and the sign band border or edge to follow a traditional application. So that is also a standard. So those are some of our concerns with the proposed wall sign. The applicant has looked at numerous designs and ways to make the sign work within this sign band. So I think some questions for them would actually be great on this proposal. But again, that pan channel letter is only 27 inches tall.
Thanks, Brittany.
And Steve, did you have some questions?
Yeah, can we talk about the projecting sign now? So it's extending 2 feet from the front of the building, which I'm not sure if that's common or not, but I'm asking you if that's been done elsewhere. And secondly, it's quite massive. It's almost 4 feet in diameter. And again, I'm wondering how that fits with other applications elsewhere.
Yeah, so the bracket is a quite large bracket. And again, the reason for that is because the House of Mirrors building is set back somewhat from the Lodo's building facade. So what the applicant has done is to push the sign to not be blocked by the Lodo's building facade when you're looking at it from the north side of the site, is that they have done a little bit larger of a bracket. So here in Plan View B, you can see the House of Mirrors facade and where that sign will be attached, and then how the Lodo's building facade is forward of that, some 22, and I think that's a 1/2 inch. So again, the sign bracket was pushed forward to accommodate for that recess into of the House of Mirrors facade. So a bracket of this size is not something like we typically see, but we also typically are looking at buildings where the facades are all in alignment with one another. Our guidelines do talk about making sure signs are visible and are coordinated with adjacent building facades and things like that. So staff did feel that the bracket being a bit larger here wasn't in conflict with our guidelines because it allowed the sign to be visible from all directions and not blocked by the building facade. And considering that this is a single-use tenant, we felt that that was appropriate. We don't feel that this would be setting a precedent for any situation for further sign brackets. It does project with what is allowed per the Denver zoning code. So again, we didn't have concerns over the bracket projection. In terms of the sign dimensions and the size of the sign face and all of those things, it is actually pretty similar, as I stated, to other signs approved by the Lower Downtown Design Review Commission in the district. So it has very similar dimensions to the 7 Grand sign and the Huckleberry Roaster sign when you're just looking at the thickness of the sign and the sign face. And I have both of those plans for the 7 Grand and the Huckleberry Roaster sign at the end of my staff report. So you can see all those dimensions there. I didn't include the dimensions of the Poca-Lola sign in my staff report, but it's also very similar in terms of size and dimension of that sign. So, you know, it is a larger sign, but it's not outside of what has been approved by the commission in terms of dimensions.
Fred, you want to?
I just have a quick question with regards to the use of vinyl. And I know that that's in our guidelines, and I'm curious, is there any thought that that might be dated? I think visually it's difficult to tell now. We do get a lot of requests in that start to use vinyl, and I'm just curious, is that, I think it was perceived as a lower quality material than paint. And I'm wondering, is that kind of your perception that that's still true, or is that, I just kind of wonder, is that an outdated perception? I don't know.
So it's not something we've ever talked about if it's an outdated perception. We do get signs all the time, wall signs, projecting signs everywhere, not just in Lower Downtown, that have vinyl graphics and details on those. And we do require all those applicants to either change it to paint or a digital print. We've never had the discussion over whether or not that's an outdated design guideline and something that we need to look at within our update. But we have always required all sign applicants to remove vinyl unless it's for a window or door sign from their sign proposal.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Brittany? I have to admit, Brittany, I had a similar question to Fred's about the paint versus vinyl. I would be curious to know which one actually would last longer, but our guidelines are clear. So
Yeah.
The other quick question, I guess that wasn't a question, but the quick question I had is, was there a dimension of the overlap of the sign band with the lettering?
I don't think the applicant provided that specifically, so that would be a good question for them.
Okay, it looked small, but
Mhm.
wasn't quite clear. Okay. All right, any other questions for Brittany before we move on to the applicant? Okay, then if we can go ahead and invite the applicant to unmute themselves, and you've got up to 10 minutes. You don't have to take the full time, but up to 10 minutes to present the project. And when you're done, we will ask any questions. And oh, and can you also please state your name and address for the record?
Absolutely. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Matt Runyon, one of the property owners. I have my phone working and the Zoom, so I got to figure this out for a second here. Can you all hear me?
Yes. Yeah, we
Okay,
can.
great. I just don't want to have like the thing in the back.
Oops.
So long story short, you guys have seen this project before. I think it's pretty exciting where we are in the project, under construction, hoping to open by the end of the year. As we contemplated the signage component to this, I just wanted to point out, Brittany did a great job working with us and presenting the signage that we've presented to you. But the one thing that's made this a little bit of a unique circumstance is that we have essentially 4 city lots, that are combined into one building. So the standards and guidelines, while we understand the intention behind them, what we've presented here, while it might step just a bit outside of what the standards and guidelines allow, we are trying to promote a business within the building. And so things like putting the signage at its current size in its current location is important, because it has to kind of tell the consumer that this entire building is Dierks Bentley Whiskey Row. So that was kind of our intention. We had a lot of iterations done to try to come up with a solution that we thought was both compelling to our customer, told our customer what we were doing inside the building, and also tried our best to adhere to the standards and guidelines. The problem is with our branding too, that there's because of the name of the business, to constrain it within the very thin sign band is a difficult thing to do. So anyway, this is kind of our presentation, fairly straightforward, but I figured I would just also say that we're excited to move forward. Hopefully, I don't know how many of you were there, I don't know, a year and a half ago, probably approving this building. So it's kind of nice to be here on the back end, getting ready to open this thing hopefully later this year. But I don't have anything really else to say unless you guys have questions for me.
Great. Thank you. And I agree. This is exciting to see this move forward. So any questions for the applicant? Oh, really?
Okay, I got off mute. I can ask a question.
Okay, excellent.
Simple question. What is the height of the existing red brick sign band, and what is the overall height if you incorporate the beige top and bottom brick? I'm just trying to understand what the reduction in that lettering is.
Yeah. By chance, do we have Anthony on and Zach? Sorry, the sign designers might be on. I don't know if they're muted.
Yeah, so Anthony's on, he can unmute when he's ready, and Zach, it doesn't look like he's got any access to audio.
Yeah, so if I can understand the question, you're asking for the difference in the lettering that we've proposed to what would be required if we fit it in the sign bands. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how much height do you lose if we constrain it to being within the sign band?
Yeah, I don't have that answer offhand. I think I don't really know how to say this. It's kind of like it just kind of it looks a certain way. So when you put the sign, and we can get the detail over to you for sure, but when you constrain Dierks Bentley's Whiskey Row within the sign band, and I've actually done this exercise. I've gone, because my office is right across the street from the location, but I've sat at the corner of 20th and Market, and I've counted the bricks in the sign band across the street at Cowboy Lounge, what used to be Cowboy Lounge. And then I've counted our bricks, right? And we I guess for whatever reason, 100 years ago when that sign band was designed, I mean, it was very, very thin, right? It's like 6 bricks tall, essentially, to give you some context. And so when you truncate the entirety of what our brand name is, it does get very small. And so to the eye, it just doesn't, you can't see it, it doesn't serve its purpose as being a sign. So, to allow people to understand what's in the building, if that makes sense. So I don't really have the dimensions, but I just thought I'd share that caveat or thought process here, why we ended up presenting this, even though we knew, what the standards and guidelines said.
Hey, Andy, I think the staff report says they go from 27 inches tall to 21 inches tall if they are to completely fit within the sign band, if I read that correctly.
I would agree
Agree
with that, Mike. On page 3 of the packet, it calls out the sign band as being 21¼ inches. And then the overall sign is 27. That 27 inches is because of the apostrophe. Most of the letters are 25½ inches.
Any other questions for the applicant? Or clarifications? Okay, well, thank you for being here and providing that information. If we have any follow-up questions, we'll let you know.
Very good.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank
And is there anyone, do you know if there's anyone here from the public?
There's one phone number, and I've clicked the button to
That's
allow
me.
them to unmute. That's you? That's what I figured.
Yep.
All right, so no, we don't have any members of the public.
Okay. All right, well, with no public comment, then we can go ahead and go into deliberation. Who'd like to lead us off? How about Mike?
On the projecting sign, I believe it meets our guidelines. I think it's 3-dimensional enough. I think that picture and kind of the rendering at an angle show that it has some thickness. And the neon banding around the rim, I think, gives it heft and 3-dimensionality. I think it's an attractive sign. In terms of the Dierks Bentley's Whiskey Row in the sign band, I actually think that, as shown, the size of it sort of reinforces the sign band in a way, because it sort of fills it and it feels proportional to the sign band. In my opinion, it doesn't completely obscure it because there's a lot of sign band that's still visible through the letters, above and below the letters. And I do agree, I sort of wish we had an example of it, but I do agree that if you shrunk it to completely fit, it's, I think it would certainly be less readable, but looking at this particular image, I actually think in a way the sign band is framed and is more clear in terms of how big it was and the architectural role that it plays on the building. That's just my reaction to looking at this. So those are my comments.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Who else has some comments? Steve?
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
It's a little hard to envision what staff is recommending. I wish we could see an image of what the lettering would be. My rough calculation is that this would require a 22% reduction in the height of the letters. And to try to visualize that in my head doesn't work very well. And then back to the projecting sign. I wonder if the image we're looking at is actually proportionate, because it's supposed to be about 4 feet tall, and it just seems quite large. But if that fits the guidelines, then I guess my concern is not warranted.
And I would say, I think it probably is proportional in looking at, knowing most doors are roughly 3 feet wide. And looking at the sign, how it relates to the door, it appears to track, but obviously we can't say for sure. Fred.
Thanks. I think the projecting sign, that makes sense to me, and particularly I appreciate staff giving us the comparisons with some of the other signs that we've looked at, and there's not much question in there to my mind. I agree with what you said earlier, Jane. I mean, the guidelines are clear that vinyl is not allowed, so I think we don't have really a choice there. I guess I would ask staff maybe at some point to look into that. We're seeing enough requests for it, and I can't believe that people would be requesting a material that wouldn't hold up because they incur costs to repair it. I kind of wonder if the technology has moved enough that vinyl makes sense. I mean, I think visually it's pretty difficult to tell the difference between vinyl and paint when you're standing on the street looking at the sign. So I guess that's just kind of a request for staff down the road to maybe look at and help us understand that the why and wherewithal on that guideline. I think I do agree it's very challenging to understand what the wall sign would look like if it was reduced in size to fit within the sign band. It is odd to me to see it overlapping the edges of the sign band. And I've kind of been looking at buildings in the vicinity, and I don't really see any other examples of that. And maybe some come to mind with staff, but there is that balance between readability and the guidelines otherwise. So I'm a little bit at odds there, trying to figure out what would it look like if it fit within the band, because my inclination is to say it would look a lot better if it fit within the band, I think. But
well, Fred, I was sitting here, the positive things of being virtual as I was shrinking it myself to see what it would look like. And, I think I don't get a really significant visual change in just kind of reducing the whole thing. I got about 22%, as Steve said, in reduction to get it to fit within the sign band. In terms of just keeping the proportion of what it is. The thing that stands out to me the most and is the most kind of significant is when you shrink that all down and you shrink the height of the letters to fit within the sign band, you have a much wider gap on the ends. And the way that they have it designed currently is that Dierks Bentley Whiskey Row kind of stretches out and fills that whole sign band. And when you shrink it down, you have more space on the side. I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing, and I don't I could honestly go either way. I was initially inclined to agree with staff and say everything needed to shrink, but I think that Mike made some good comments and is about the overall size and the way that the sign band frames that entire signage piece. And I also think that with this sign, the sign band is very simple in its form. It's not a very ornate sign band. It's, red brick behind and then just the beige brick border. If we felt like it because of the height of the letters, you've got just that extra little 1.5 inches that pops up over the top of the letters for the apostrophe. Like I would be, if everybody was okay with that, maybe a compromise would be that most of the letters need to fit within the 21 inches of the sign band, but that apostrophe can pop up over the top of that border. Maybe that's
exactly what I was just wondering.
A compromise to keep the height as much as possible. But
I was also wondering if a way to approach it too is to specify a minimum dimension of that sign band that should be seen. Like you said, if right now it's 1.5 inches, you know, is 2 inches, or I don't know if that's a way to approach it too, but
Well,
Heather, maybe your approach is better.
can I point out that the letters are 27 inches tall as they're presently shown, and I think it would reduce it to, I don't know if it was somewhere between 18 and 22, but we're also just shooting in the dark here, and I don't know how we can make a intelligent decision without seeing what it would be reduced.
I think Brittany has some clarity for us.
Yeah, so I can actually show you a concept that basically shows what Heather was talking about, if you would like to see that.
Yeah, I think we would.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would need Jen to give me permission. To
Yep,
share
just
my
a sec.
screen.
Just realized that. There you go. Now you can share your screen.
Okay. So this is, again, just a rendering concept, but this is essentially what Heather was talking about. So the letters would also need to shrink horizontally, and there would be more relief on each end of the sign band. And this is kind of what it would look like.
That one looks like it still overlaps.
Yeah, I don't think it's intended to, but again, this is just a rendering of it, so.
Mhm.
I have to say, I think
I
it
don't
makes a lot of sense.
You think it does? I don't think that looks that different. I think these are relatively small changes. I personally like the way that it fills the sign band left to right instead of recessing in from the edges. I think it reinforces the sign band if it fills the sign band, even if that means overlapping it somewhat in the spaces where the letters attach to the sign band in that vertical dimension.
Couldn't they kern slightly to make it fill that? I mean, if you shrink them down, you could kern them slightly and change the spacing between the letters slightly and the spacing between the words slightly. And it seems like you could easily make up that difference.
Yeah, I think that's doable, but at the same time, we don't want to design it for them. And if this is kind of the spacing and the font and everything that is part of their brand standard, that might be a difficult proposition or ask to ask them to go through and change all of that, as opposed to just shrinking the whole thing down. Personally,
I'd like to say, I don't think it materially affects it to shrink it a little bit like this. I think that's still very readable. Those letters are somewhat massive. I mean, you can look around similar buildings with lettering on them, and I think it's rare to see anything over 20 inches tall personally. I've seen plenty that are very readable that are more like 12 to 16 inches maybe.
Oh, Andy, sorry. Into your hand.
So just a clarification or a question. In the, Brittany has up, there's two verticals that kind of close off the sign band. How does the proposed lettering interact with that? Does it still fit within those vertical constraints, or does it overlap those? Because it doesn't really show up in the illustration in the packet.
Are you talking about if the letters were to be smaller, Andy, or?
No, so the ones that you've got on the screen now, this is the letter size, isn't it?
So this is a different proposal that the applicant, I know, doesn't favor because of the as we were talking about the kerning as far as the left to right.
Yep.
I do see that they have their hands raised, so I don't know if this would be better questions for the sign designer to answer, which is Zach and Anthony. I don't know if the commission wants to invite them back to answer some of these questions.
I'm happy to, if unless anyone else objects.
Right, I will move them back. Oh, I think Emily's moving them back. All right.
So I guess, yeah, the hope for the applicant is that, you'll answer the questions that the commissioners are asking. But does the question make sense that Andy posed?
Absolutely. So it looks like the sign band is actually 27 inches tall on the sides. And we did propose a couple options, and I think Zach has a couple he was trying to forward over to me, that we did have some renderings with it inside the sign band, and you guys are correct. It just didn't look right. The sign band, there was a lot of blank space in between D and W at the end of, so, I mean, we wanted to keep, their brand standards and fonts and everything, the same. And we thought that making it a little bit bigger was a little bit more visible to the public, and it just looked cleaner and nicer. Yeah, so we're waiting on some of the old renderings. I got them in paper form here, but I don't have them digitally right now.
Andy, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that, yeah.
Hey, Brittany. The thing that we're looking at, the sign ban, it stands proud of the field of brick that it's against, I assume by a certain dimension, an inch or 2 inches or something like that. In order to make the sign fit within the sign band, I would think that there would need to be a space between the top of the letter and the bottom of the projecting brick, for example, to make it fit within that. What we're looking at, I don't know if this is the exact super tight dimension between the top of the sign band and the bottom, if it's just sort of tucked in there really tightly, or if this is shrunk enough so that there's a little bit of space top to bottom.
I wouldn't know that because this is just a rendering that I was sent where we discussed, we've discussed so many options for how to design this sign, and this is just one of them. And again, I know the applicant is not a fan of this one because of the kerning and how it doesn't kind of match with their branding. So I've looked at versions that overlap significantly with the sign band. I've looked at ones that are there were signages on top of the sign band. So what was presented today is kind of the compromise that staff and the applicant have reached, where it doesn't quite meet the guidelines, but they wanted to ask the commission if it was appropriate. We as staff have to more strictly interpret the guidelines, and you as the commission, who can discuss things in a public setting, could provide that additional flexibility that Heather maybe was mentioning, where the apostrophe is dropped down some, or as Jane was saying, that a certain percentage of the sign band needed to remain visible. The fact that it's individual letters is not entirely covering the sign band. We would strongly recommend denial of any kind of sign with a backer that completely covered that sign band. So that may be something that you want to discuss as well. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Brittany. I appreciate all that. I would just offer that if these letters are to reside within the sign band, there needs to be some relief between the letter and the band, so it doesn't look just sort of packed into the band, which will make the letters smaller. And again, it's just my opinion. I think that as presented, the band itself is visible through the open letters, and the larger sign, in my opinion, reinforces the sign band by sort of matching the size of the sign band. I think once we tuck it inside, it gets smaller than is rendered, and it just starts to come in like that. And it loses its effectiveness as a sign, and it becomes more at odds with the architecture behind it. That's just my perspective.
Any
Just
other?
put- I just wanted to put back up the actual proposal so
Yeah.
that you guys can
That's
look at
really
that.
Well, and I also, since we've got a number of conditions listed in the proposed motion, and it sounds like I'm not hearing any other kind of concerns about condition related to the vinyl or in general, the projecting sign. So I just want to make sure that's the case. And Andy, are you raising your hand for another comment, or is it just?
Yeah, I was just trying to jump in here, and I just wanted to reinforce what Mike was saying in that the lettering fits within the sign band, and although we normally see it tucked in between the brick, and normally how I would perceive that sign band, thinking back when the building was built, is these were probably painted letters or applied letters that weren't neon letters or channel letters like we have here. And it's using, and this is a poor analogy, but it's using the sign band similar to the I don't know if anybody else had to do writing classes when they're in grade, but the letters are forced to stay within the lines. They don't go over the lines. Had they gone over the lines, be like, no, we got to bring that in, but it's using the line for that lettering. And since these are raised letterings, I think Mike is making a good point, is that if we have to fit within the sign band and these are 3-dimensional letters, they're going to be, I think they need to be even smaller to give some relief, but it's doing that reverse. And so I think having the letters slightly overlap the sign band, use the entire sign band and not overdo it, I think it's using the space fairly well. I think the one thing that is not in the staff report, it shows up for the limestone lintel, but I think the only thing I would add is that any penetration for these letters happen within mortar joints as most we can, as opposed to face brick. Those are just, I'm just trying to swing some people from one side of the argument to the other.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think Andy and Mike that that filling that space feels better than having the tiny letters in the center, because again, as Mike pointed out, the relief that would be required, I think, would make them, or that would look best, would make the sign very small. And that typically, historically, like you said, Andy, when those signs are painted, they fill the band. And sometimes that does result in very wide, unusual font appearances, but they typically would fill those bands. Adam, do you have something to add?
Yes, Adam Hernandez, Assistant City Attorney. Just as we're talking about this sign band issue, I want to remind the commission that what the staff report is saying is that this specific standard, and Brittany, jump in if I'm wrong, but I believe you're talking about standard 3.1a, which says when using an existing sign band, provide space between the sign and the sign band border or edge to follow a traditional application. Staff's look at this proposal has decided or recommended to you all that this standard is not being met. And so that is why they are recommending the condition that they are. The discussion that you all need to have is whether you agree with staff's recommendation. Do you feel 3.1a is being met with what's proposed right now? If you do, and if you can articulate that, then you would not have to add that condition. If you do not feel that this is being met, then the condition would be proper. Or you could look at the language of your guidelines, which say, if something is not meeting a specific standard or guideline, you can look at the intent statements of that section and see if a variation of that standard or guideline is still appropriate. Here, intent statement 3.1 says design wall signs to complement a historic building. So the discussion you all could have is if you feel standard 3.1a is not being met with this application, but it is still meeting the intent statement of 3.1, it would be appropriate for you all to say this condition is not necessary because the proposal is meeting the intent of 3.1. Does that help at all?
It does for me, because I appreciate the reminder that, every decision we make needs to be based in the standards and the intent of the standards.
Okay.
And I believe you were beginning to kind of discuss that with the traditional, like, a wall application would be a painted sign. So, and this is individual pan channel letters.
Well, I think we're trying to create a public record here. So I would state that I believe that this sign does meet the intent of section 3.1. And therefore approving this sign as presented is appropriate and does meet the guidelines despite the more specific language of 3.1A, because I do believe it meets the intent of 3.1 generally.
Thanks, Mike. Any other comments on that topic? Okay. Then does someone feel comfortable making a motion?
I'm happy to attempt a motion here. I move to conditionally approve application 2021 COA 184 for the wall sign and projecting sign at 1942 through 1946 Market Street per design standards and guidelines for the Lower Downtown Design District, presented testimony, submitted documentation, and information provided in the staff report with the following conditions. Number one, revise the vinyl graphics proposed for the projecting sign faces to be either digital, print, or painted. Number two, ensure that the penetrations in the limestone header can be patched and repaired. Number three, attempt penetrations for the wall-mounted sign primarily in mortar joints rather than through brick face where possible.
I'll second.
Thanks, Mike, for the motion and Andy for the second. So we'll need to do a
Can I ask
roll
a
call.
question?
Yeah.
How will condition number 2 be met? Ensure that penetrations in the limestone header can be patched and repaired. Is that just something that the applicant would relate to staff a plan for that based on conversations with their mason? Would that be sufficient?
So the applicant indicated that they would provide that information to me. I just didn't get it in this packet. So
Great.
I think that could be provided.
Great, thank you.
It's a minor point, but frequently these things are glued on, not drilled as well with little spindles.
But it sounds like with the condition that we have, there will be follow-up with staff to ensure that that condition of the attachment detail will be met. Is that accurate? Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and do roll call vote, starting with Mike.
I vote aye.
Andy,
Aye.
Fred,
Aye.
Heather,
Aye.
Steve,
Aye.
and Jane is an aye. So the motion passes unanimously. And thank you to applicant and staff for helping us through that process. Okay. So with no other design agenda items, we can move on to business items. And I think I turn that over to you, Jen.
No, the business item is the election of the chair and vice chair, and so I leave that to you all.
Okay, so then for that to occur, does somebody make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Is it separate or together, or does it matter? I'm just curious.
They're usually separate.
Okay.
And I forgot to do this last time, but because there was a motion and a second, and then we voted, you guys can have a discussion on the motion and the second, which, you know, I always forget that. So sorry for last time.
It's okay. So Steve, it sounds like you had a motion.
Can I make it very simple that we keep the existing leadership in place?
I think you need to state who that is and what that means. And I think it should be, you need to separate them actually. Sorry, Steve.
So we would be, I propose we make the motion that Jane Chrysler remains chairman and am I correct, Mike is vice chairman? And that we continue with them in those positions.
But I think Jen was saying they need to be
Motions, one
two
for
separate
chair.
motions.
And
Okay, I make the motion that Jane Chrysler remains chairman of the LDDR Commission.
I'll be happy to second that.
And would anyone like to discuss? Okay, then let's go ahead and vote. And do I have to do a roll call or? Okay, all these roll calls. Okay, Mike,
I vote aye.
Andy,
Aye.
Fred,
Aye.
Heather,
Aye.
and Steve.
Aye.
And I'll abstain. Why not? Hopefully that doesn't, yeah, that should be fine. Okay, so that sounds like that motion passes and thanks. Is there another motion that anyone would like to make?
Sure, I'll move that Mike Coffin be appointed vice chair of Lower Downtown Design Review Commission.
I will happily second that. Any discussion? Okay, let's go ahead and do a roll call again. Mike.
I will abstain.
Andy.
Aye.
Fred.
Aye.
Heather.
Aye.
Steve.
Aye.
And Jane is an aye. So motion passes. Congratulations, you two. Big shake up there. But thank you for splitting the votes, just for the record.
Yeah. Great.
Well, we don't have anything else at the, I think you guys have asked me before, I believe, and it might just been LPC, but I think you guys asked me when we're talking about going back in person for in-person meetings. I don't have news there yet. City Council is aiming for sometime in June, and boards and commissions will follow suit at some point after that. So it would be the summer. We're trying to figure out all of the technology issues surrounding how to run a hybrid meeting, because do we make applicants come in person? Do we make members of the public come in person? Do we allow virtual there? Presumably we would be required to have all commissioners in person who are there. We wouldn't do a hybrid option for them or for staff. So we're just trying to figure out those logistics. And I actually have a meeting this afternoon about that. So stay tuned. I'll provide more information as soon as I have it. But we don't have a specific timeline. We have a general, in the next few months timeline.
Thanks.
Can I ask one quick point of information here about the signage, back to the question about vinyl? Can somebody explain to me what's the difference between a digital versus, I mean, wouldn't digital be done on vinyl? Or I don't understand why digital is okay and vinyl's not.
I'm looking at Brittany.
So I'm just gonna explain based on what sign companies have told me. I'm by no means an expert in this. So the digital print is like where you take the aluminum face of the sign and kind of, the best way I know to describe it is like a screen print onto like a t-shirt. So it's kind of like the difference between a screen printed shirt and like where t-shirts had the vinyl like applied to it.
I would say
It's
like
the
that.
best.
The iron-on vinyl that you would do, you can pick up at the craft store. Yeah. I mean, they actually have a giant printer and they put the metal or acrylic or glass or whatever material it is, and they feed it in there and it gets heat set and printed directly on the surface of the material.
There you go. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you too, because I had no idea.
I mean, I just raised it because we seem to get so many requests for the vinyl now, and I just wondered if the technology of the application of the vinyl has changed sufficiently. I know I have vinyl lettering on an interior window of a building, and it you know, it used to be you just kind of peel it off, and it's like, no, that stuff is not coming off without a razor blade. And so I just wondered if it's changed and we're kind of outdated. It just seems odd that we get so many requests now to do it by people who I think know what they're doing. So that's why I asked it.
And
I
you
think
know,
the experience I've had, Fred, with looking at that is that sometimes it really depends on the quality of the vinyl and the manufacturer, because you do get the ones that, you know, have really good color retention and they don't fade in the sunlight, and, you know, really good adhesion. And like you said, it takes a razor blade to peel those off. But there's also really, really cheap, really, really garbage vinyl that, you know, if it's exposed to sunlight, it starts, anything that's white will turn yellow. It starts to fade. The color retention is really bad and it'll peel. And if it's not, you know, as it, like with the sun and the UV, it starts to peel, it starts to flake off. And then if it's not properly adhered, you get curling, and you can, you know, somebody, especially if it's a sign that is within reach, people can pick at it, or they can damage it, which is the other concern.
Well, is it also true that you can't, once that happens, there's kind of no going back, where at least with paint, you can address that maintenance issue better?
well, with vinyl, you just use a razor blade and scrape it off and relay it.
And
But
redo it. Yeah.
the other issue is that when you're looking at cheap vinyl versus good vinyl, you don't know when they're new which is which. So if you were to allow vinyl, I'm afraid you probably have to get it certified that it's fade resistant and long term. But you know, we're getting into the weeds.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate the education. This is just helpful to understand some of the bits behind some of this. Thank you.
And I'm sure, Brittany, that was a lot of work with that client. So thanks for.
Something tells me you guys were debating 1/2 of an inch versus 3/4 of an inch versus 3/8 of an inch.
I can't even count the number of proposals, calls I've reviewed for this particular one.
Been there. I feel your pain.
Can I pivot for a second too? I meant to mention that we've been interviewing for the empty position that is now an at-large position for the LDDRC. And I anticipate that sometime over the summer, we'll actually have that filled. It really depends on how quickly we can get the mayor's office to address it. And obviously there's a lot going on with mayor's office right now in terms of, you know, pandemic relief and all of that. So this is lower on the priority level, but we've interviewed 5 people, all of whom are very qualified and would be great additions to the commission. And so we're excited to have someone else on board, hopefully like July, if that works out.
I missed who left.
So Jesse Adkins left a year ago. And then we couldn't fill a property, or not a property, it was a
Business owner, right?
business owner in the district because COVID had just hit. And then we transferred Steve over, and that took several months to transfer Steve over after recruiting for several months. and moved him to property owner. And then we tried to recruit for property owner for several months, and that got nowhere. And then Fred volunteered to be moved over to from at-large to property owner, and that took several months for the mayor's office to do. So we finally, yeah. And Tom has his term was up because his was a short term, because it was a new position. His was a short term, and his was up this year, and he has offered to re-up again, and the mayor's office, that's in with the mayor's office waiting for reappointment, but that's thought to be a given. So we just have this one spot open that has been open for a year, and now is at large, and got some great candidates. So that's,
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else before we adjourn?
You know, I might just say I walked by the project we looked at a couple of days ago, and it's a major work site. It's worth having a look. It's pretty interesting.
yeah, they said they were doing excavation, and they found some bottles and like a bunch of old things in the ground, like subterranean, which is pretty cool. So
Yeah.
hopefully they kept them, and we'll put them inside for other people to see.
Yeah.
I've got some of those kinds of bottles in my garage and in our office downtown.
Well, if anyone cares to, I have a complete collage of everything we discovered in this building when we renovated it. We do have bottles, etc.
Cool.
Awesome. Okay, well then I think I can just unilaterally, with my great powers, adjourn the meeting, right? So